So, before this video begins, I'd just like to say a few words about a more serious topic. I just want to take a moment to talk about a cause that I care passionately about. So, for those of you who don't know, last December I was banned from the r/Berserk subreddit after I was embroiled in a controversy over me posting a video showing MIura in an interview confirming that Casca did enjoy it. Now, the Berserk Mods did not take kindly to me disrespecting the author, even though all I did was post MIura's own words making himself look bad. So I was banned, my voice was censored, and I suffered horrible abuse when I tried to appeal, because you have to understand that the r/Berserk subreddit is run by a bunch of partisan Griffith haters who will bully anyone who tries to point out the toxicity of the community. And this came after years upon years of them turning a blind eye to me getting sent death threats every single day by users on that sub. Because it's okay if someone gets murdered as long as they're a Griffith fan, right? This really affected me, and in the aftermath I did spiral into a really bad place. Some things happened, which I'm not going to get into for privacy reasons, but you'll see that from December onwards in my channel there's been almost no activity, because I was so depressed that I was about to give up, basically, on this whole channel. But having been through that, and coming out on the other side, it's given me a new perspective on what we as Griffith fans need in this community. For the sake of our own mental health, we need a safe space where we can talk about all things Berserk without the fear of being abused or killed by deranged gut stands. So I'm making a new Berserk sub, one where free speech is enshrined in its very constitution, and one where corrupt mods can't just ban you for you being yourself. And we can have healthy debates there, one where you won't be bullied for merely having an opinion. So I'm going to be sending out application forms soon for anyone who wants to be a mod, so keep your eyes out for that. And I'm having a bit of trouble coming up with the name. I was thinking maybe Berserk Real, Griffith Fans, Berserk Official, Real Berserk, but I really want this sub to be able to be competitive with the other Berserk sub, r/Berserk, in the hopes that it will one day replace it. We, as Griffith fans, can change the discourse, and we can change this community for the better if we put our minds to it. And if you're new here and you've only just come across this channel and have any love in your heart for decency and fairness and free speech, join the revolt. Fight for Griffith. Join the Cichlid Stands Discord. Fight for freedom. Fight for the good that you know still exists and can exist in this community. That's enough of my rambling, guys. Enjoy the video. So I've recently been getting super into iceberg videos. The ones where the further down the iceberg you go, the more niche and interesting the information gets. And while the format seems to have been done to death in the broader internet culture, it seems to me that in the Berserk community, a lot of the icebergs tend to be sorely lacking in terms of real underground stuff in the sphere. This is interesting. And I did actually see that recently I made it onto one of the popular icebergs, which was really validating for me, and it put a spring in my step for the whole rest of the day. It's inspired me to make my own, so here it is. The real Berserk iceberg with some proper, real, deep, interesting, niche stuff that's really rewarding when you actually, like, sink your teeth into the community and find out about it. But I guess I'm just telling it you all here. So we're starting off in the sky above the iceberg, and this is where you'll find your average layman, the bits of Berserk that have broken through into mainstream status. And these are often the avenues in which people actually get into it. So first off, we have Guts' theme, which is this really cool, freaky, sort of psychedelic kind of sound, which unfortunately has been popularized by YouTube memes and TikTok sounds. And so something that veteran Berserk fans like myself held on to intimately and dearly for so many years, listening to it at 3 a.m. while we were crying, has now been reduced to just like normie music. And so any resonance or meaning that the song might have once held has just been totally poisoned. And I can't even watch the anime anymore because it all just feels like one big Gen Z meme. Next up, we have Dark Souls, and I think this is where most people actually get into Berserk from. Dark Souls is this kind of Berserk ripoff made by From Software Games, Hayao Miyazaki. And when they hear about the dark fantasy design elements in that game being heavily inspired by Berserk, a lot of people are like, hey, let's check Berserk out, and they become fans from there. And I'd love to see their faces when they found out that Berserk isn't actually a dark fantasy manga and is actually a shoujo manga for teenage girls full of love triangles and cheesy anime internal monologues. Now, one of the most infamous memes revolving around the Berserk community is that of Berserk 2016. Now, this adaptation is an absolute mess, a fucking tragedy. Travesty. Now, this thing is supposed to be a sequel to the 2012 movie trilogy, but they absolutely butcher the story in so many ways. But the most egregious thing about this adaptation has to be the animation quality. Now, for those of you who don't know, Berserk isn't the prettiest manga in the world by real art standards, but it's pretty fucking nice. And the way they've decided to adapt it is with these horrifically ugly CGI monstrosities with totally deadpan expressions and awful cinematography. And get this, the only well-animated scene in the entire show is the one where Farnese gets raped by this possessed demon horse. Almost. But that's not the only reason it's infamous. Every single time Guts swings his oversized sword in the show, they use this exact same stock saucepan clang that makes it sound like a weird, like Looney Tunes cartoon. Berserk for the longest time suffered from really long hiatuses, rivaling Yoshihiro Togashi. Miura, for the longest time, was suffering from a swelling heart, and eventually it exploded, and he sadly died. Since then, things have been a lot better, but when it was bad, it was Guts spent 8 years on a boat bad. Now, Schnoz is another Berserk meme that comes from this panel of a really cute, lubbly, squeezable little gremlin creature that everyone looked at and was like, oh, this is really funny. It's not funny. So now we're into sort of lapping the surface of the sea territory. For those of you who don't know, Berserk started, like every other manga for that matter, as a small one-shot prototype labeled Berserk the Prototype. It involves Guts with an Eyepatch, which is weird, you don't see that often, and Griffith as a small girl child. It's really short, there's not much to it, so if you want to dip your toes into Berserk without your first experience having to be that horror, that horror that is chapter 1, page 1 of Berserk, if you know, you know, try it out. It's alright. Now, r/Berserk is the main subreddit of the Berserk community, obviously, and it's mainly notable for being very toxic and discriminatory towards the people who don't fit into the very narrow worldview of the mods. I was actually sent death threats every single day for years, and that was enabled by the mods. They just stood by and let it happen. They won't allow you to make any valid criticism towards Berserk's creepy author, and they certainly will not stand for posts that show any kind of nuance or sympathy towards Griffith, because, and you can tell, the sub is just chock full of homophobes. I was called all manner of homophobic slurs while I was on there, and I don't know why. The only reason I'm giving it the time of day here is to warn y'all to steer clear of it. If you want a Berserk community to become a part of, then please join the new Berserk subreddit that's coming soon called Berserk Real, r/Berserk Real, where you won't be censored by the mods and will be able to have nice, wholesome discussions together. I'll be creating that soon, so please stay tuned for that and subscribe, please. There have been several incidents, let's call them wars, between the Twitter and the Berserk fanbase over the years. Twitter's recent discovery of Berserk has gone hand in hand with its discovery of some of its more problematic elements, that being the over-sexualization of rape in the story. I say over-sexualization, and you can't over-sexualize rape. Now, the people who make these criticisms are mainly women, and the Berserk community being full of just Andrew Tate stans don't take kindly to these women's valid criticisms of MIura drawing Casca's rape as if it's some kind of hentai porno. It gets so bad that these sweaty edgelord gut stans go so far as to gaslight these women into believing that they're the freaks. As if the only way these people on Twitter could see the rape as sexualized is if they themselves are into it. It's absolutely disgusting, and it's victim blaming. Are all of the people who have a problem with the sexualization of the movie Cuties attracted to kids? No. That's fucking ridiculous, and you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. This is victim blaming. Now, the Griffith did nothing wrong argument sort of started off as a semi-ironic meme, where people would say that because Griffith created Falconia, a paradise on Earth, from a utilitarian perspective, he's actually exempt from condemnation for all of the horrible things he did in the Eclipse. Now, in more recent years, with the advent of the YouTuber Cichlid, more serious and foolproof and foolhardy takes have emerged regarding Griffith's innocence. Now, for those of you who don't know, Griffith supposedly sacrificed all of his friends to demons for a gay Batman suit, or chicken wings, depending on your interpretation, and then went on to rape his best friend's girlfriend in front of him. Now, this take has a lot of holes in it, and I'm going to delve into it a bit later on in the video, but if you want a real good in-depth look at why it's wrong, then I'd recommend Cichlid's series on YouTube, where he explains Griffith's innocence. So while the Griffith did nothing wrong meme started off as a semi-ironic joke, through Cichlid's grassroots activism in proving Griffith's innocence, the take has reached more mainstream position, although it's not all the way there yet. We're just dipping our toes in now. Next up we have Studio Taka, and a little bit of background information is needed on this. Now, Berserk has never really had a real anime adaptation that goes past the Golden Age arc, and fans like me have been waiting for nearly 30 years to get a season 2. And it seems we've gotten so desperate that we've started taking matters into our own hands. Studio Taka is one of these, a group of dedicated fans who have decided to create their own adaptation of Berserk in the form of animated black and white chapters from the original manga, and these things are gorgeous. Unfortunately, it takes them so long to adapt it that they've released only 2 chapters in the last 5 years.
With this new story, we're starting what we're internally referring to as Season 2 of Berserk, the animated manga.
It's really depressing, and I don't know how these guys do it. It must be so demoralizing to have this snail-pace release schedule in the knowledge that they will all be dead by the time they reach chapter 30. And to make matters worse, they've recently been completely overshadowed by a new fan-led animation studio called Studio Eclypse, and you can tell by Studio Taka's recent output on YouTube that they feel really threatened by this. I love this one, where they just seem to be casually throwing shade at the new adaptation. They seem to be in full cope mode at this point. And it's a real shame, because the black and white animation from these motion comics, taken directly from Miura's artwork himself, I consider to be the perfect adaptation. I don't know who ever decided that it would be a good idea to put color in a Berserk adaptation. And it's exactly why I'm so excited for the upcoming Uzumaki anime by Junji Ito. Even Miura's own color drawings are like completely amateurish and shit, and I could do better. I'm really glad they decided to push for this minimalist monochromatic style.
And our first introduction of colour to the series.
The character Pippin has always been a bit of a mystery for me in terms of his popularity within the fanbase. I mean, he's literally just a mute who doesn't say anything ever. I mean, I guess he's like maybe relatable for socially challenged Guts stands, but he's only ever done two things within the story. Picked up Guts without his consent and hit a wall with a hammer. That's literally it, and yet he tops all of the charts for most popular Berserk character, and I have two theories for why this is the case. One is that people are gaslighting themselves into liking all of the canon fodder characters that died in the Eclipse, because they want it to hit harder for some reason. They want it to be the darkest thing in fiction, even though nobody important died. But the main reason I think Pippin is so popular is because the Kentaro Miura himself stated that Pippin was written as a stand-in for Kentaro Miura. Pippin has Miura's personality, and because a lot of Berserk fans like to suck up to Miura as a second coming of Christ who can do no wrong, they give Pippin this sort of transcendental status as this kind of Berserkian saint up there on the pedestal. Earlier I mentioned Berserk Chapter 1, Page 1, and the reason I described it the way I did is because the story opens up with Guts having sex with a demon lady. Now, a lot of people are taken aback by this, but they think nothing of it. And later on in the story, when they read about Guts' intimate relationship with Casca, for some reason it doesn't click that, oh my god, he just cheated on Casca. He cheated on her. He cheated on her with a dinosaur. If you know about all the horrible things Guts has done to Casca throughout the story, this just rubs more salt in the wound. Now, r/Berserklejerk is the meme sub of the Berserk community, and so you'd think they'd be a little bit kinder to Griffith fans, or at least be a little bit more liberal about the kind of content they allow to be posted on the sub. But nope, they still hate Griffith and they still bully Griffith fans. But regardless of any of that, the sub is completely unusable anyway, because any dissenting opinion post is locked behind mod approval and will never get posted. And they don't even allow you to post videos. The whole community just feels really stale anyway. The sub feels like it's stuck in 2010, just regurgitating the same Donovan and Casca Enjoyed It memes as if they're still funny, which they're not. Now, Berserk was a really pioneering manga in the 80s, especially with how they handled Casca's ethnicity. Casca has dark skin. She's from the border region with Kushan, and while it doesn't really have that much or any bearing on her characterization, a lot of anthropologists have liked to argue that she was actually the catalyst that kick-started the trend of dark-skinned anime women in the 90s. And so I wonder what might happen when Berserk 2016 decided to just race swap her to just like another white chick. Massive controversy indeed. There's a sizable portion of the Berserk community that believes that Charlotte was actually raped by Griffith that night when he crawled into her chambers, but that's actually really not true. It's highly likely that everyone giving that argument has never ever actually had sex, because there is actually such a thing as non-verbal consent, and Charlotte showed lots of it. She lifted her head back to let Griffith kiss her neck and touch her body. She was very, very into it. Miura himself, upon seeing that people were misconstruing the scene and that maybe he'd been a little bit too ambiguous with it, he went out of his way to involve himself in the production of the second movie to change that scene. So now, Charlotte literally grabs Griffith's hand and shoves it into her breast. So there is absolutely zero ambiguity about her enthusiastic consent. Billie Eyelish is on this list because of something I found recently that took me by surprise. You wouldn't usually take her for a Berserk fan, but she's actually been captured on several occasions wearing Berserk drip clothing. Even in one instance, wearing a Griffith from the movies shirt. A potential secret Griffith fan? A covert cichlid dog whistle? We'll never know. A lot of people hate Griffith, mainly because of how he raped his best friend's girlfriend in front of him, but not a lot of people realize that he actually didn't. That was Femto. You see, human Griffith would never have raped Casca. This is because the transformation artificially stripped him of his ability to feel love and empathy and compassion. In the words of the idea of evil, his heart was frozen. So all of the anger that had previously been held back by his love for guts all of a sudden came crashing forward in this chaotic, rapey scene from hell. Human Griffith did nothing wrong. And speaking of the idea of evil, there's what's known in the Berserk community as the Lost Chapter, referring to Chapter 83, which prematurely revealed the god of Berserk's world in an audience with Griffith. Miura believed that he had revealed this too early, and so he had it removed from canon. And to this day, you can only find it through really old scanlations of the original 90s release in the magazine. And this has left it in a really weird limbo state where no one can really agree whether it's canon or not, because the idea of evil actually first shows up on the very last panel of chapter 82, and nothing in the story since has contradicted it. On the contrary, there seem to be little nods and foreshadowing towards the idea of evil to this very day. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that Griffith's heart wasn't actually frozen because the idea of evil isn't canon, just tell them that that part of the conversation happened in chapter 82, which was released in the volumes adapted into the 1997 anime and the Berserk movies. Studio Eclipse. Oh boy, have you ever seen a bigger swindling of an entire community into thinking that this is actually going to be a thing? They've essentially promised a full-color adaptation of Berserk, and they've released these trailers full of fluid, gorgeous Sakuga, and they've somehow convinced the entire fanbase that we're finally gonna get a true adaptation and this is what it's gonna look like. And I'm just like, you do realize these are pre-animated trailers, right? And they probably took months to do. They have claimed that the Black Swordsman arc, which is what they're adapting, is going to be coming out in 2025 this summer. But I guarantee you that only the first episode is going to come out then, with the second episode coming out like a year later. They're animating this like alternative ending of Attack on Titan at the exact same time, and like, no offense, but like, it's all really ugly. It has that sickly clean digital shine, while simultaneously not having that polish that makes professional anime look any good. And so it all ends up looking like sort of dodgy anime fan art that's like, there's just something off about it. And yes, they have some great looking sequences, but I guarantee you that they have used them all up for the trailer, and most of it's gonna look like ass. They will have finished the Black Swordsman arc in 5 years. Do not get your hopes up, people. It's just not a reasonable alternative to a real adaptation. I'm sorry, it's not. They're lying to you. People have always criticized Griffith for his possessiveness and entitlement, especially his sense of ownership towards his men and especially Guts. And people usually point towards the scene where Griffith says, "You are mine," as this kind of encapsulation of all that is wrong with Griffith's character and his treatment of Guts. But a lot of people seem to miss that Griffith is literally just granting the wishes of Guts himself. He wanted to be a slave. Guts actually suggested the duel and laid out the terms of service for his servitude to Griffith, and Griffith literally just agreed to it. Guts brought it up. Griffith initially was just really nice and kind and friendly towards Guts, and Guts responded in an incredibly homophobic manner, insinuating that Griffith wanted to own Guts as a sex slave. Guts wasn't at all interested in a reciprocal, respectful, equal relationship between two consenting men, and so all Griffith could do was play along. Griffith didn't really believe that Guts belonged to him, and we see that in the very final moments in the Eclipse where he admits that to himself in his own head. And speaking of Guts, has anyone else noticed that he literally eavesdropped on his best friend without him knowing about it? People are always having a massive go about how mean Griffith is, but then completely ignore Guts literally betraying his best friend's privacy. If Guts hadn't been so narcissistic and entitled here, then he wouldn't have heard Griffith lying to woo the princess, and Casca wouldn't have been raped. I feel like I look like Jim Halpert in The Office getting interviewed. This channel is a Jim Halpert Stan channel. Next up, we have Slan's lies, and it's important that everyone in the community know about this one. A lot of people like to claim that Griffith selfishly sacrificed all of his soldiers for his own selfish ambition and kingdom and glory. But that's actually really not true, because Slan actually lies to Griffith that the Hawks would consent and agree to be sacrificed as martyrs for martyrdom, and to ensure that their efforts up until this point had not been for naught. She tricked Griffith into believing that that's what the Hawks wanted because she knew that Griffith would never want to willingly betray their wishes. And for those of you saying that she only said that they should forgive him, that's actually a bad translation, because in Japanese it's actually impossible to say that something will definitely happen or someone definitely feels this way. That's just not how it works. You can't say that in Japanese because from a Japanese perspective, how could you ever say with 100% certainty what's in someone else's mind? So if I said, oh, Michael feels sad. I can't say that in Japanese. I have to say, I bet Michael's sad at the very most. And we kind of understand that that basically means yes. It essentially means bound to in this context. And I speak Japanese. Nani kore? Griffith no hou ga gatsu yori ii desu yo. So once again, Griffith did nothing wrong and he was manipulated. Judeau is everybody's nice guy character. He's a good little boy, right? Wrong. Despite his witty charm and his gestures of love and affection and caring towards Casca, his endearing silent love that he can never speak of, beneath that lies an incredibly selfish, evil murderer. If you take a moment to step outside of the narrative framing, this is a guy who lived an incredibly comfortable life as a circus performer. And despite that, he decided to join a bunch of mercenaries and go around killing a bunch of innocent soldiers who were forced onto the battlefield by feudal law. And why, you ask? So that he could feel second best to Griffith. He enjoys killing and wants to brag about it. Do not fall for his sickly smile. Griffith is legally innocent. It's true. If you tried to sentence Griffith in a court of law, you wouldn't get very far, At least not if I had anything to do with it. Why? Because accountability requires what is known as a mens rea, which essentially boils down to having willful evil intent and being able to discern the consequences of your evil actions. You cannot have a mens rea if you lack the capacity to give informed consent, and for Griffith, he could not give that to the Godhand's contract. Griffith was in a mentally ill, hallucinogenic, suicidal state and had been suffering from blood loss. He could not discern reality from illusion, and for that reason you cannot condemn him for anything he did while under the influence. If I drugged you with an aggression drug, like in The Boys, and then you went on to murder a bunch of innocent people, would you like it if everyone then started saying that you're evil and you're at fault and you're an unforgivable monster? No, that's fucking ridiculous. If you actually look at the details of Griffith's dream and what he wanted to achieve, you'll realize that it wasn't selfish at all. Having been brought up as a dirt-poor street rat in the slums beneath Wyndham Castle, Griffith understood what it was like to have no opportunity in life and sought to establish a new kingdom of meritocracy for himself and his men. A new kind of society based on talent rather than your aristocratic family crest and your position on a social hierarchy. Griffith knew that all of his men's dreams rested on his shoulders, and he knew that he had to keep pushing on and achieve his dreams to make sure that their dreams came into fruition. Griffith was a socialist. He wanted to throw a wrench at the system, to reform it from within. The idea that he's just this selfish, evil hog is just gut stand propaganda and completely ignores the text. Now, you've already heard my opinion on Pippin as a character, but I think the problem goes a little bit deeper than that. The framing of Berserk's narrative from Guts' perspective means that you end up spending very little time thinking about what the characters have actually done with their lives. Pippin was originally part of a miners' guild, which was one of the highest paid jobs in the Middle Ages. It was unionized with a hell of a lot of bargaining power, and they had freedom of movement and ability to live in their own little commune together. It was basically like an idyllic life. And yet Pippin, just like Judeau, heard the call of glory and thought, you know what? This isn't good enough for me. I'm gonna go join a bunch of thugs and go around murdering a bunch of women and children. Now, Smudboy is a content creator on YouTube who seems to have copied Mauler's content style, reacting to other videos on the platform and then acting extremely bigoted towards them for about 3 hours and making terrible points. He attacked one of my videos on Griffith Did Nothing Wrong, and then we ended up having a 3-hour-long full debate where I ended up destroying all of his arguments, and he ended up looking horrendously dumb for it. He unironically argued that it was impossible to feel empathy for strangers, and therefore Griffith could not have felt bad about all the men that died for him. Watch it. It's really good if you're into debates. Super Eyepatch Wolf is a really popular YouTuber who's done a lot of good work in popularizing Berserk to the normies, and he seemed like a really nice Scotch guy. So imagine my surprise when I go onto his Discord server to talk with him about Griffith, and he acts with such a passive-aggressive, toxic demeanor that I'm just like, you are not the person that your online persona suggests, and it's kind of ironic considering the videos you've made on that very subject. Basically, I beat him in the argument, and then he tried to explain to me that I'm wrong, because if Griffith wasn't actually evil like I was saying, then Berserk would be badly written. And I had to explain to him that narrative intent doesn't mean anything when the narrative execution ends up having Griffith emerge as not a bad guy. Why am I obligated to accept a story's moral framing? as if it's true. Say if I were to write a book, and I tried to frame one of the characters as being super evil because they were gay, you don't have to accept that framing and then hate them for being gay, and I don't expect that you would do that unless you're a Guts stan. And in response to this, I guess he felt really personally attacked and shown up to be dumb in front of his audience, because he started getting really passive aggressive and just started abusing me. I can't actually show you all of the messages because he deleted them trying to cover his tracks, but just know that that sweet smile and British charm isn't all that it seems to be. Guts actually became Griffith metaphorically in the Black Swordsman arc. People always criticize Griffith for his emotional repression and the persona of apathy and control that he always projected. But people forget that Guts did the exact same thing in the BA arc in response to the trauma he got from the Eclipse. He lies about wanting to squish weaklings like bugs, he claws at his own arms to repress himself, and he runs away from his feelings and neglect towards Casca. This is all a very Guts way of doing what Griffith did throughout the Golden Age arc. And you might say that Guts actually got past that eventually, but so did Griffith. He was developing massively throughout the Golden Age arc, opening up to show his soft side and his vulnerabilities to Guts. He had one bad day, and his life was fucked up forever. Guts, on the other hand, was able to mope around for 2.5 years, leaving Casca to fend for himself, and he didn't suffer any consequences for it. The lucky bugger. Now, Aleczandxr is kind of a sad one, and I still feel really kind of bad about it. He has the most popular videos about Griffith on YouTube, and so I tried to debate him about it on his Discord server, but he was having none of it, and he banned me. Now, this was around the time when I first created my Discord server, Cichlid Stands, go join it right now, and I wasn't really aware of the etiquette or dangers of running such a huge community server. And so when I complained about the situation to them, a lot of my fans took it upon themselves to go over to Aleczandxr's server and raid it, which I didn't want, and this especially controversial communist fan, who I'm not gonna name, got very aggressive and confrontational towards him, and I think he ended up having this massive mental breakdown. Now, later on, I did message him over X, and we did come to a mutual understanding. I really do hope that that bridge hasn't been burned forever. I have since learned some responsibility in the management of my community, and, the fact that I am such a big YouTuber, I do have to act responsibly on the internet sometimes, otherwise people's mental health can be at stake. I'm really sorry, Aleczandxr, I'm sorry. Now, this one's fucking crazy. So, I was just minding my own business reading the Conviction arc when all of a sudden a soldier picks up a refugee from the river who is dying of the plague, turns them around, and oh my fucking god, it's Jill! It's Jill from Berserk! Jill is dying of the plague! Jill died! Jill died of plague! It has to be, right? They have the same facial structure, the same eyes, the same nose, the same mouth, the same face shape, the same hair, everything. And I hear a lot of people coping by saying that the hair color is completely different, but that's the way that MIura draws wet hair. She's in the river. People also say that it ruins the thematic poignancy of the Lost Children arc. But what could be more berserk than by having such a hopeful message be so savagely undercut with the harsh realities of death, and in such an understated and unimportant manner? 'Cause Jill doesn't really matter. Not in the grand scheme of things. There's a point here about Berserk Mods, but I think I've complained about them enough so far in this video. I don't want to beat another dead horse. If you weren't already convinced that the Band of the Hawk are evil people who deserved what was coming to them in the Eclipse, just check out this panel from chapter 78. I have never seen anyone point this out, so I must be the first person to realize it. But the God Hand are showing Griffith past scenes of the Band of the Hawk murdering, burning alive innocent women and children during their plundering. It really puts into perspective how narrative framing influences our perspective on these evil men who are actually getting their just desserts. There's this Nietzschean ideal of the Ubermensch, or Superman, that's a massive theme in Berserk, and a lot of people like to think that Guts fits it best. By these edgelords' own interpretation, it should be Griffith 100%. Who else rejects the common morality of society at large, grabs life by the balls through the will to power, and doing whatever the hell they want to do? Harnessing master morality to take control of their own destiny, forging their own path while squishing the bugs at their feet. Guts was too much of a pussy to do that. Surely Griffith is the true Nietzschean ideal of Berserk. I'm sure MIura would attest to that. Now, I wouldn't feel right telling y'all about this one without first shouting out fellow YouTuber Kyle Entertainment. He was actually the first one who pointed this out to me, and it just shows how good he is at analyzing anime, manga, and media more broadly. Go check out his channel. He has some really good videos on Attack on Titan and Berserk. Now, he pointed out to me, and this is genius, that Charlotte actually raped Griffith. And it's so obvious that I'm a little concerned that I didn't realize it beforehand. Griffith was in a severely mentally compromised state of mind, and he was literally dissociating as he acted out the movements of sex. He clearly wasn't okay. Just look at his blank expression and dilated eyes. Charlotte surely saw this, and yet she still advanced anyway, because she was so desperate to get into Griffith's pants. It's a credit to MIura that he's able to write such nuanced characters within the story. I mean, is there any character in Berserk that isn't evil besides Griffith? I really didn't want to have to tell y'all this, but Casca actually enjoyed it. It's been confirmed. Or at least in the author's own opinion, that is. You see, it was revealed last December that in a little-known Berserk guidebook released exclusively in Japan called the Berserk Monster Manual, there was an interview back in 2003 of MIura explaining that Casca actually enjoyed it, and not just physically, but emotionally, because it was Griffith who was doing it to her, and that her mind broke out of embarrassment that she was enjoying it so much in front of her boyfriend Guts. Now, I posted this information onto r/Berserk, and the mods quickly had to engage in damage control. They ended up shooting the messenger, banning me for merely posting the words of the author, all for making him look bad for himself writing a scene where the victim of a rape was actually super into it. But that's the moral caliber of the guys who run r/Berserk, and it's why you should join my new subreddit, Berserk Uncensored. It's out now, I just made it, it's not a porn sub, it's a free speech zone for Berserk fans of all shapes and sizes. And finally, we have the last one, and this might blow up the community. People like to believe that Guts is a good person, but that's actually really not true. You see, minors can't consent to sex because they're emotionally and physiologically underdeveloped, meaning that they lack the capacity to fully understand what sex is and its emotional consequences. What makes child molestation so abhorrent is the betrayal of trust between a vulnerable child and an adult who has the responsibility of protecting them. This is where I get to Guts as a character. After Guts' actions led to Casca mentally regressing to the equivalence of a toddler, Guts took the responsibility of protecting her in this childlike mental state so that no harm would come to her. Then, in volume 23, he goes so far as to sexually assault Casca while wanting to rip her to shreds, taking advantage of her physical and emotional vulnerability. In this sense, Guts committed the moral equivalent of child molestation, because any reason that you could give for a toddler being unable to consent to sex is equally applicable to Casca in that state of mind. Guts is just as bad as a child molester, and that take got me banned from our real-life Ryan's Discord server. Apparently, so many people were distraught with me revealing this that they all collectively left the server, and Ryan had to do the noble duty of banning me to protect the reputation of a literal child molester. You know, I think I might be the only Berserk YouTuber with any moral integrity left.